We're going to begin with a word of welcome and prayer by our board chair, Mary McAleese, former President of Ireland.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special occasion and a very important occasion for the Ansari Institute. I'm just so sorry I can't be there in person, have to be there virtually, but I went to my wardrobe and close to my heart, I have my Notre Dame sign and my Notre Dame shirt. So I hope that unites me in some way with all of you who are fortunate enough to be there in person. When Don Keogh died back in 2015, after a stellar business career and a multitude of awards which spoke of his genius and his achievements, his distilled experience of life and the world left him with a very profound faith in God and a deep concern that scholarly respect for and understanding of the religious sensibilities of the vast majority of humanity were being overwhelmed by a kind of secular weariness, by abuse of religions for political ends, and that the world was going to be an awful lot healthier if somewhere like Notre Dame, where religion is so deeply respected and understood, if it could lead the way in scholarly but courageous global engagement with religion and about religion. Now, I grew up in Belfast, so I knew a thing or two about religious differences. I grew up during the Troubles and knew from firsthand the dangers that are posed where neighbours with very strong religious perspectives, also worse still, religious perspectives tweaked and twisted with political perspectives, where neighbours grew up in ignorance of one another and fear of one another, with no real conduits for growing an understanding of one another, left really just to wallow in that fear. And there, of course, the scandal was that sectarianism flourished between Christians, between people who were not just nominally Christian, but who really believed very strongly in their Christian faith. And that at times outcropped in hatred and it outcropped in violence. So when I heard about Don's vision for a future where that kind of ignorance and fear or dismissal and disinterest in religious beliefs, for that could give way to a kind of a studied understanding and tolerance with real embedded conduits for dialogue, for conversation, for the building up of respect and tolerance, well, I was hooked. And I remember the day that Professor Musa and Scott and I explained the idea of an institute dedicated just to those things and based at Notre Dame, based around the idea of global engagement with religion. When we explained that idea, that notion, that vision to a remarkable Muslim couple, Rafat and Zoreen Ansari, they got it immediately. And so with their help, the Ansari Institute was born. And in fact, that help, of course, was a great boost to a sense that this idea, this vision had a real integrity about it, that it spoke across all the religious boundaries. It just spoke to people of faith. And if the spiritual life is the descent of the mind into the heart and into the soul, deeper still, then the Ansari Institute is a guide to all God's children to find not just God through that personal interior journey, but to find each other, to find brothers and sisters, to find family, not just within our own denomination, but outside that, among all people of faith, and to find among ourselves vehicles that make us capable of growing in embrace of one another, regardless of color or gender, denomination or faith or doctrinal differences, that we discover we are family and that we are resplendent with all the unfathomable differences and talents, but linked by love, ultimately searching for one another in love. That's what Ansari really is all about. And it's about the isolation and the elimination of ignorance and hatred, of which we have all had way too much. Our vision now for Ansari for the next 5 years is set out in our marvelous strategic plan, launched today, in the personal and online presence of each of us. And believe me, that strategy has grown out of the most intense debate, reflection, discernment. It's guided by the lodestar of integral human development, which is a core of Catholic social teaching, yes, but it resonates right across all the other world faith systems. It will not be unknown to them. It will be familiar territory, the idea of integral human development. And this is where we hope to encounter one another, to work together, and importantly, to grow together. I'm just so sorry that I'm not there to engage in just that lovely debate that you can really only have person to person. But I feel so very privileged to have watched the Ansari Institute go from an imagined and wonderful idea to a wonderful reality. And I want to congratulate all those who have nurtured it to this point and whose stewardship is going to take it right across the strategic plan to the new landscape that beckons beyond. I wish Mahan and his formidable team Godspeed as they roll out the strategy and guide all of us with open hearts and, of course, with great scholarship to a landscape of really fresh, provocative, but ultimately really healthy thinking, fresh friendship in faith right across the globe, because that globe is our family home. And, you know, the kitchen is in Notre Dame. So welcome to this very special event. And can I start us off, or start you off in your discussions with a very ancient Irish prayer. It's one of the most beautiful prayers. It comes from the Confession of St. Patrick. So it's about 1500 years old. And I think it's very beautiful. It comes from the poem or prayer known as the Deer's Cry. Seems to me it's kind of appropriate at the moment when we're all focused on the earth and what we owe it and what it has given us, what we've taken from it, and how we need to nurture it. Here is what St. Patrick said 1500 years ago to us. I arise today through strength in the sky, light of sun, moon's reflection, dazzle of fire, speed of lightning, wild wind, deep sea, firm earth, hard rock. I arise today with God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look ahead for me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me. God bless and enjoy.
So good evening to all of you. I think most of you know me. I'm Mahan Mirza, the Executive Director of the Ansari Institute. We have a two-part program today. So part one is before dinner, it's with the salad. And part two is going to be after dinner. So you can enjoy your salad as I say my brief remarks and what follows. And I'd like to say just three things in this first part. Number one is gratitude. I'd like to thank Mary McAleese for the welcome and prayer and for the time that she devotes to the Institute, and to all of you for honoring us tonight with your presence. I'm especially grateful to our Dean, Scott Appleby, without whose support and mentorship this evening would not have been possible. I'd also like to thank the event staff and our communications team, Laurie Roberts, Josh Stowe, and Erica Loading, for your work behind the scenes. I'm also grateful to our advisory board, faculty committee, and my two faculty colleagues, Alex Chu and Charles Powell. We are here tonight because of our combined efforts. It's been a joy to be with you on this journey, and it's exciting to think that we've only just begun. So that was the first thing, gratitude. My second point for tonight is to briefly talk about what I'm not going to talk about. which is everything that the Ansari Institute is currently doing. If you're interested in learning more about our classes, conferences, field trips, and programs in multi-faith engagement, and if you're not already on our email list, please sign up to receive the announcements, which you can do at ansari.nd.edu. Refer your friends and follow us on Twitter at ansariund. I would, however, like to highlight just one of our programs that brings journalists, faith leaders, and academics together in trialogues to enhance religious literacy and to change the public conversation about religion. We're calling it Faith in the Story. The first of our 3 workshops is coming up this December, and we are grateful to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations for supporting this program. And by the way, Michael Murray, the president of AVDF, is in the house today. So give it up for Michael Murray. I don't know where you flew from, but we know South Bend is typically not on the way of wherever someone is going. So thank you. And to read more about the genesis of this particular project, please pick up our conference report, hot off the press. There's a few print copies there, and PDFs are on the way. And it's titled Religion Beyond Memes. Now let me turn to my third and final point, the topic at hand. Looking to the future. The strategic plan is in our hands. It's in your hands. And I don't intend to go over it systematically. That is your bedtime reading for this evening. There are, however, just 2 things I would like to highlight. One, we are at the world's premier Catholic university. As an academic institution, our mandate includes teaching and research. In line with this core mission, over the next 5 years, we aim to hire 2 full-time regular faculty members to enhance our capacity in generating new knowledge at the intersection of religion and global affairs, and to support the formation of our students as global citizens. So that's one important landmark that we hope to achieve in the course of this 5-year strategic plan. The second point I'd like to highlight is the signature initiative of our strategic plan, a fellowship of faiths. To quote from our plan, so this, when you read tonight, you will remember that I read it to you earlier. The Ansari Institute's signature initiative, in effect, aims to provide a platform for a public and generative conversation on the world as it should be, as envisioned and as contested by the diverse religious and wisdom traditions of the world. To that end, the Ansari Institute aims to cultivate a fellowship of faiths consisting of individuals whose faith is a centering feature of their identity. To borrow from Peter Oakes, one of the pioneers of the practice of scriptural reasoning, the fellowship will, and this is what he says, first and foremost be enjoyable for its own sake. Consisting of prominent intellectuals whose work is informed by their faith, and practitioners whose faith is informed by credible academic research. The fellowship, once it naturally matures, will be a body that responds in publicly significant ways to issues of common concern in local and global affairs, adding its voice among the prophetic voices of our time to guide the human family into a better future. So that section was from our plan. That's our vision. And today we take our first steps in implementing this vision. We have asked 3 very special and distinguished individuals to help us move forward with our plans in the coming months and years. They are here with us today, virtually, online. But you can see them in person later, and I'll say more about that down the line. We've invited them here to introduce themselves to us by speaking about how their unique backgrounds and areas of expertise will inform the work we hope to do together. And they'll be speaking in this order. First, Carolyn T. Brown. She's the board chair of the Fetzer Institute, and she has served as the director of the Office of Scholarly Programs and the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. She's also the author of Reading Lucian Through Carl Jung. Second after her will be Claire Brown. She's professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley, and she's the director of the Center for Work, Technology, and Society. She is the author of Buddhist Economics, an enlightened approach to the dismal science. And finally, we will hear from Ananthanand Rambachan. He's a professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies at St. Olaf College. And he's the co-president of Religions for Peace and author of A Hindu Theology of Liberation. And I believe Ananthanand is joining us from Thailand. So thank you, Carolyn, Claire, and Anant, for graciously agreeing to be with us online. After they have spoken, we'll break for dinner. And then in the second half of the program after dinner, so you can't leave right after you've eaten, I'll say something more concrete about where this is going. Over to you, Carolyn.
First, thank you so much for your introduction, and special thanks for inviting me to join this conversation on the Ansari Institute's strategic vision for the future. At this time of converging global crises, I do believe that the human family needs wise and thoughtful voices that arise out of the deep wisdom of the world's religious traditions. Offering these perspectives in the public arena is more than timely. Religion at its best, I think, speaks to the major challenge of living a moral, meaningful life within a sacred reality of an unfathomable universe. The insights of these multiple voices are badly, badly needed. I think every human life, and I include my own in this, has three intertwining dimensions: that interior life of our minds and spirits, our outer lives, our work and action in the world, and our sacred lives, our experience of being part of something infinitely larger than ourselves, a loving presence that holds and guides us. And I just want to comment briefly on these three dimensions. First, the inner life. We all know the material world draws our attention outwards to school, family, work, and so forth. But somewhere along the way in life, most of us run headlong into an unwelcome crisis that forces our attention inward. A dark night of the soul, as it were, a period when what we thought we knew and were comes undone. If grace finds us, we fall into fruitful suffering and deep reflection and come to know parts of ourselves that were previously hidden. Buddhism, I think, is especially astute in naming this process, in freeing us from our limited understandings. However, all faiths help us manage these crises and transitions. All offer guides, imams, priests, others, to help us through these dark periods, as well as, of course, the more predictable transitions in life. My key guides through my own dark night of the soul was a wise psychotherapist who was Jewish, and the writings of Carl Jung, the founder of modern depth psychology and a Christian by birth. As we come to know more fully our inner lives, the light and the shadow, I think we become more whole, more authentic, and more compassionate towards others. At least I did. It was during such a time that I learned, to my horror, that when I am afraid for my life, I am actually capable of murder. I mean, real murder. That was a sobering discovery and has made me less quick to condemn others who do terrible things. Then our outer life. We are all given work to do in the world, and whatever that work is, we can perform it with self-knowledge of our light and our shadow, and so avoid creating harm and indeed actually ease others' burdens. For this reason, I believe that gaining self-knowledge is a moral imperative. In my life, I try to remember, and of course I don't always succeed, the search for the story behind every face, for the suffering, but also for that spark of the divine. I hope to look, at least imaginatively, past surface differences and to see each person's deep humanity. Another of my mentors, the Chinese writer Lu Xun, taught me through my engagement with his short stories that there is a continuum in the patterns of our inner lives, from that of self and family through our communities and into the world at large. He brought to each domain a deep concern for the suffering of others. A man of his culture, he was schooled in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. I now understand that the way we behave towards others is primarily because of who we are, not because of they are. Again, the importance of self-knowledge. Our world right now seems fragmented and fragile. Too many are consumed with rage and fear. That's certainly easy to see. As I look at our multiple challenges, whether poverty, migration, and violence, and of course the ultimate challenge, climate change, I imagine that we are entering a global dark night of the soul, where every external thing that we have relied on is under threat of becoming undone, unlivable, that we may quite literally lose our physical grounding, our oceans, our soil, our climate. But I believe climate change is at base a spiritual crisis, although one with shattering material consequences. How do we come to see ourselves as a human family, each of whose members deserves loving care and deep regard? Can our religious roots motivate us to avoid disaster? Where are the spiritual guides for this time? I think we have no choice but to draw on the wisdom of the world's faith traditions. And this brings me to the third dimension of being human, our relationship to the sacred. All of the faith traditions were founded, I think, on some revelation of a sacred mystery that holds us and guides us within a loving presence. All are, at least in part, collective attempts to communicate that experience to others through story, ritual, theology or philosophy, spiritual guides, sacralized spaces, and other means. I grew up Presbyterian and was schooled in that wonderful poetic language of the King James Bible. Maybe not always accurate, but beautiful language. I was also raised in a household where the reality of an unseen spirit at work in human life was assumed, although I think not much discussed in the family. I never had to overcome that post-Enlightenment fallacy that God is just a metaphor and the universe empty of meaning. Looking to faith traditions for guidance, therefore, is natural to me. If I think of the mentors who have deeply influenced me directly, in person through their writings, and who have themselves been shaped by their own faith traditions, I can see that my life has been touched by multiple faiths, by Christianity most directly, but also Judaism and Buddhism, less directly by Confucianism and Taoism, and even by whisperings from Hinduism and Islam. In their various ways, these faith traditions have grappled with the complex entanglements of our inner and outer worlds and have grounded their teaching and rituals in the experience of and reflections about sacred reality. Somewhere embedded in each faith tradition are resources to help us through this moment, to invoke a sacred vision and offer a path toward hope. The wisdom of these traditions has been tested and honed through the ages and is available to us here in the 21st century if we listen deeply and open our hearts to it. My hope for the Ansari Institute then is that as it steps out into the world, it will find ways through its fellowship of faiths and other programs to offer wisdom to a world, to the human family in a time of great need. Thank you so much.
Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your compassion with us. And thank you, Mahan, for bringing us together to join in tonight's opening event, because I'm delighted to join you tonight. I'm sorry, I would love to be there in person as you begin on a new endeavor to help people and the planet in a world that's out of balance. Leading a gathering of faith-based people provides a safe place to contemplate and discuss what is human flourishing. How can we help people who are suffering from poverty, from heat, drought, wildfires, and sea level rise, from violation of human rights? What can we do to create an economy and society that provides a comfortable life of dignity and well-being for all people and the planet? Let us start by acknowledging our interdependence with each other and with the planet and with nature. The beautiful, caring energy in the room tonight comes from the gathering of people of faith and of goodwill. So I think that the energy that's here can give us strength tonight, but we can carry it with us as we go forward. And so I would like to just take a moment for us to take a few deep breaths and understand our interconnectedness. So I hope you'll join me in breathing for just a moment. With your eyes closed, inhale and exhale while silently repeating these words. Breathe in love that surrounds you. Breathe out love to the world. Breathe in compassion. Breathe out compassion. Breathe in peace. Breathe out peace. Breathe in love. Breathe out love. And I hope that as we did this, we understood how we were exchanging energy and feeling our interconnectedness here tonight and always. Thank you for breathing with me, because this has been an important way for me to, as a Buddhist, to often during the day when actually I need to feel less angry or overwhelmed, or when I want to and feel more compassionate and empathy, I'll stop, breathe, and repeat words that depend upon the situation so that I can get interconnected with the world again and return to understanding what makes life meaningful. So let me turn to Mohan as asking me to speak a bit about my work on human flourishing and indices of well-being that I'm doing with the G20 Interfaith Group, because everyone knows that the human spirit is a critical part of human flourishing and well-being, but there are no metrics that actually incorporate it. So people of faith know that caring for the body and the mind is one part of our lives. Physical well-being lays the foundation. Education provides knowledge to understand and contribute to society. We also understand that people are both self-caring for ourselves, our families, and altruistic, caring about others, even though those we do not know. So altruism and interdependence mean that our well-being depends upon the well-being of all people and the planet. In this way, holistic well-being includes care for the human spirit as part of human flourishing. But this is what is being left out of metrics of well-being, even in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So let's pause and think about, how do we incorporate well-being of the human spirit into our daily lives, but into the world around us? Let me share with you how I integrate caring for the human spirit in my daily life as a Buddhist and as a climate activist, not to mention an economist. As a Buddhist who grew up a devout Episcopalian, I spend time caring for my human spirit through meditation and also through climate justice activism, especially related to phasing out fossil fuel energy that's overheating the planet. As Pope Francis teaches us in Laudato Si, to spew carbon into the atmosphere and harm the most vulnerable people is immoral and must be stopped. Quote, he teaches. We have come to see ourselves as nature's lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. Yes, we know the world is really out of balance at this point, and yet it's because of human activity. Now, changing our individual behavior is helpful. Living simply, lowering our carbon footprint, it's important, but it's woefully inadequate. To follow both Buddhist teachings and the Catholic social teaching during this time of an existential climate justice crisis, as we continue our daily spiritual practice, we must also engage with others to stop destroying our planet. The Ansari Institute is ideally situated in a world-class university filled with well-motivated students and teachers and with global spiritual networks. Ansari can use its knowledge and resources to bring together like-minded groups that want to create a sustainable, equitable, flourishing economy and society. At this critical time, we must go beyond conversation and contemplation. We must become social activists for the common good, for the common home. As the Dalai Lama said, humans created the problem and humans must solve the problem to avert disaster. Spiritual engagement requires that we demand governments, along with companies and organizations, to create the necessary policies to stop using fossil fuels, to care for land and forest, and to share prosperity with all people, both at home and around the world. My request to you tonight is to follow Pope Francis, who teaches us how to apply Catholic social teaching to help the most vulnerable people. We must stop using fossil fuels. We must care for our common home and for each other. This takes courage. Courage to change our economy, courage to join together to demand justice and human dignity for all, courage to live with joy as we care for each other and the planet. May we heal the planet as we heal ourselves for the benefit of all. Thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mirza, my dear friends. It is a special joy and honor to join the Ansari Institute and to be a part of this very important work. Interfaith learning and interfaith cooperation for building communities of love and justice have been an integral part of my work as a scholar and as a Hindu practitioner for over 4 decades. This work started for me in a very special way in 1981 when I was a young PhD student in the United Kingdom. I was invited by the World Council of Churches to attend a Hindu-Christian dialogue meeting in India. The topic was religious resources for a just society. It was my first participation in a discussion of the relationship between religion and justice. I was challenged to think critically about my tradition, to explore its resources for justice, and to struggle with interpretations and practices that legitimize injustice. This meeting opened my eyes and launched me on a lifelong journey of interfaith learning and practice. I took questions from that meeting that I continue to pursue to this day. In the course of my journey, I discovered also that interfaith learning that I experienced in India had deep theological justifications in the teaching of my Hindu tradition. The Yajur Veda, one of our sacred ancient texts, describes the infinite divine, and I quote, that from which the mind and speech return, having failed to reach. The divine will always be more than we can define, describe, or comprehend with our finite minds and symbols. No representation of the divine in image or words will ever be complete. When we speak of this one, we do so only with a sense of wonder and an awareness of ultimate mystery. The implications of this teaching are profound for me. Interfaith learning does not require that I forsake the teachings and practices that continue to enrich and to give meaning to my life. It requires, however, that I always profess these with deep humility and a reverential openness to the possibility of learning from other traditions. To be a faithful Hindu, I am not required to make the claim that all wisdom about the divine is to be found within its boundaries. A famous prayer in the Rig Veda expresses the wish, and I quote, may noble teachings come to us from every side. Ano bhadra kritavo syantu vishwataha. The learned person is described as being rich in wisdom and humility. Interfaith learning does not require me to overlook or to minimize differences among traditions. In the Rig Veda, again, wise persons are described as speaking in many ways. Vipraha bahuda vadanti. By acknowledging that wise people may speak differently, the sacred text invites us to a respectful and inquiring response to religious differences. I must not denounce the sacred speech of the other as undeserving of serious contemplation because it is different. Wisdom must not be identified solely with my way of speaking, and I should not assume that wise persons always speak identically. When encountering the ancient religious traditions of my neighbors, I would do better to assume that these endure because they speak wisely and meaningfully to human challenges. Religious differences are opportunities for learning. My life as a Hindu continues to be enriched by my relationships with friends of other traditions. My spiritual poverty, I know, would be much greater without the gifts that I continue to receive from them. For this, I continue to be deeply grateful. Multi-faith engagement and interreligious dialogue are central in the plans of the Ansari Institute, and I look forward to new opportunities for learning, for sharing, for building relationships in my journey with all of you. Thank you very much for the honor of speaking these words to you this evening.
Thank you, Carolyn, Claire, and Anand. They may be, I think they can still hear me, but they'll drift out of the program at this stage. And I'll say more about them after dinner. And so you'll see me later. And for now, please enjoy your meal.
Hello, everyone. I apologize for interrupting your dinner, but my name is Annie Foley, and I was asked by Professor Mirza, who is one of my advisors here, to come and speak about the impact of the Ansari Institute on my undergraduate time at Notre Dame. So As a brief introduction, I'm currently a senior in the Global Affairs program, also studying anthropology, and much of my work at Notre Dame has been involved with the Ansari Institute. So it all began in the spring of my sophomore year, which was the spring of 2020, which is a spring we all fondly remember as the beginning of COVID, when I took a class called Holy Crossroads, Religion and Politics from South Bend to South Asia, which many of you may know about and have heard about, but that class changed my life. And I don't say things like that lightly, so this means a lot that I'm saying that right now. That class was the beginning of my engagement with the Ansari Institute and really with the idea of religion and global affairs as a whole. So as a brief overview, during this class, we talked about how religion influences and does not influence global politics. And we were able to travel to Muscat, Oman, importantly with a cohort of peers from Notre Dame University, Bangladesh, in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And we spent that week traveling around Oman, engaging in interreligious dialogue, learning about the Muslim way of life as Christians, and getting to know our peers and our colleagues there. We even interacted with scholars at the College of Sharia in Muscat, which was really, I would say, the turning point in my own college career, and that it got me to think about these questions of what does religion mean for different people, and how is it mobilized both for peace and for conflict across the world. And that's the theme that I have continued to study throughout my time at Notre Dame with the support of the Ansari Institute. Two classes in particular have really shaped my trajectory. The first one, both of them with Professor Mirza, who I have to say is my favorite professor at Notre Dame. The first of those classes, and he didn't ask me to say that, that's all, it's very honest. The first of those classes was called Islam and Global Affairs, and the second was called American Adventurism in the Middle East, and we talked about the role of religion in US foreign policy and engagement with countries in that region. And so those two classes have influenced me to pursue a career in what I hope will be focused on religious peace building. Again, as I talked about, how is religion mobilized both for peace and for violence, and how can we make sure that it is only mobilized for peace going forward? And I've only ended up where I am today with the support of the Ansari Institute, and especially Professor Mirza. And so I cannot thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you to Annie, my favorite student. That trip to Oman was a real adventure, and I have to be careful what I disclose here to this audience. But we were leaving as COVID was just hitting us, and I kept checking with the office at Notre Dame: are we shut down? Can we go? And there was still no policy yet, and we were literally boarding the plane. And Professor Jason Klochek and I were going together. He said, Georgetown just shut down after spring. Harvard just shut down. And we were boarding the plane. I'm like, turn your phone off. And we made it there, and there are lots more stories from where that came from. But it was a lovely trip. And it's these kinds of experiences of encounter are most meaningful and sorely needed for any real, I think, education in global affairs, and we're happy to really take that very seriously and hope to give our students and continue to give them more opportunities in the future. And we have faculty members here who are right now, I think, on the top of the list for NDI in terms of enrollment for a summer program in Poland, Charles and Amelia Powell. So this is something that I think their course has also been very transformative, and student testimonials really shed light on that. Well, let me just pick up from the thread before dinner. What's next for us is to extend and deepen the perspectives that you heard from Carolyn, Claire, and Anant. We'll have at least a couple of opportunities to do this next year. First, on March 17th to 19th, the Keough School is organizing a major conference on dignity and development, collective responses to complex challenges. The conference will feature scholars, policymakers, practitioners, and judges from international courts from around the world. The Ansari Institute will host a plenary session at that conference featuring Carolyn, Claire, and Anant in dialogue about religion's role in constructively addressing the myriad complex challenges confronted by humanity today. So that's on March 17th to 19th. Mark your calendars, and we hope to see you there. So now I have a major announcement for next fall 2022. The Ansari Institute will offer a generous prize to an author of a book that meets the following criteria. 1, it speaks in a normative and authentic voice that is representative of a major religious tradition, recognizing well that all traditions are internally diverse. 2, is conversant with the current ways of knowing about the world through relevant academic research. And 3, it engages one or more contemporary issues in global affairs, providing new ways to understand existing problems or identifying novel solutions to already well-defined problems. So the mix of those 3 criteria. The award seeks to make an intervention in the conversation on the place of religion in global affairs in line with the Ansari Institute's strategic plan. So this is where I read from the plan again, and you'll recognize this when you hit the pillow tonight. In response to Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks showed us another way, a way in which we would let our differences be a source not of degradation, but of dignity. The dignity of difference is a plea, he exhorted, for tolerance in an age of extremism. The capacity of religion to be a source of systemic and structural good in a manner that is relevant to global affairs, argues the rabbi, is far too little tried. So we are here to add to the growing number of initiatives that are making the attempt. As such, this strategic initiative will shape the Ansari Institute's distinctive identity among the family of institutions on global engagement with religion, generating a wide-ranging, multi-faith conversation on the world as it should be. So that's the section from the plan. The Ansari Institute believes that recognition of a major book in this form will enhance the importance of the Institute as a center for engagement with the concept and practice of integral human development. A center that is, to use a phrase coined by Pope John Paul II, which we use in the plan, a crossroad of religions. In addition to the book award, a symposium around the award-winning book where we'll solicit multi-faith perspectives and responses to the book, will generate new knowledge, indeed perhaps even a new subfield in which ancient wisdom, as transmitted to us in the form of the major religions and philosophical traditions of the world, can inform and even transform current policy debates. Beyond the recognition and generation of scholarship, the award ceremony and symposium will help us build a community of like-minded scholars, members of diverse faith traditions and commitments. After a few years of doing this, so we're starting next year, and we hope to make this a tradition and continue it if we are able to succeed. And after a few years of having convened, the symposium will reflect a kind of fellowship of faiths, as envisioned in the Ansari Institute's strategic plan. I'm pleased to announce that Carolyn, Claire, and Anant, whom you heard from earlier, have agreed to guide us by serving on the steering committee for the award and symposium. And I hope that members of our faculty committee will also be willing to serve. You know who you are. Finally, I am delighted and deeply moved to announce that the award will be named in honor of Randa and Sharif Nasr, in recognition of their generous contribution of $150,000 toward making it a reality for us next fall. Please join me in thanking the Nasr family. Thanks, Mahan. Good evening, everyone. In deference to this esteemed audience, I have written my speech. However, I decided not to read it, and I'm gonna speak to you from my heart. And the reason is, everyone who was greeting me today was with a very nice, inviting smile, very inquisitively asked me, and how are you related to Notre Dame? And so here is my answer to that question. I am originally from Egypt, and I came to America in 1981. I've been living here since then. So I come from, I have to generalize. I come from mainly a largely traditional, religious, conservative, unidimensional culture. And I come to, again, largely, okay, with many exceptions, largely modern, secular, liberal, multi-dimensional culture. So I wouldn't say that this was a culture shock, but I felt that I was like in no man's land. I didn't really, after living for a while here, I felt that I didn't really belong where I came from, and I didn't exactly, fit with the current contemporary local culture. So that was the question that I was grappling with for a long time, trying to find a solution. And generally speaking, we tend to think that religion and modernity, at best, they run parallel to each other, and the twain shall never meet, right? Or at worst, they are on a head-on, collision course. But based on my experience, I really don't see it that way. I actually see it as being complementary. Religion and faith give us a sense of direction in this world, and modernity and acquired knowledge basically tells us how we can live like a better life. So I believe that both can be combined, and I came up with a term for that. I call it theo-modernity, from theology and modernity. I expect, of course, that this idea would be antagonized by both ends of the spectrum. The religious people, particularly where I came from, are going to say, no, 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 you are whitewashing, modernity, and modernity is bad, obviously, because of the historical legacy of, how the Muslim world has rubbed shoulders with like Christendom over like, centuries, politically, economically, culturally, and more recently with secular Europe. Whereas the modernists obviously are going to say, oh, you're trying to bring religion into the discussion, and we had enough of that, and we are like, thank you, but no thanks. We're not really interested. But I still think that if we can reduce the goal to a lowest common denominator that we can all agree on, which is basically that we all want to live in peace and dignity, primarily with ourselves, so that like our spiritual and material needs are not in conflict, and our scientific and religious, ideologies are not in conflict.
and with other fellow human beings and with the environment, animates, animals, and even inanimate environment. We don't want to make things radioactive or global warming and so on and so forth. That's number one. And number two, that every human being has the right to reach their full potential, whether they are born in New York City or whether they are born in Bujumbura in Central Africa. So with that in mind, I have been having lots of dialogues with my very good old friend Mahan, and he told me about the wonderful things that are being done at the Ansari Institute. So I thought that, you know, me not being an academician, and I'm coming from sort of like an activist, you know, sort of background. I think, you know, Muslims need to pick up on their game and do better than what they have been doing. And I think I like to sort of take a small step in that giant project. But I felt that adding some academic rigor to the project would definitely help. And this is where, you know, the connection is being made. You know, I am reminded of like Kevin Costner in The Field of Dreams when he says, you know, if you build it, they will come. You know, 4,000 years ago, about 4,000 years ago, our common shared, you know, grandfather Abraham, the father of Isaac and the father of Ishmael, he was summoned by God, according to Islamic sort of literature. He was summoned by God to build the house of worship in Mecca, the Kaaba, and to make a call for all humanity. You know, at that time, of course, like there was like no one in that like wilderness in the middle of nowhere. But as you know, today there is about like 2.5 million people that come every year for pilgrimage, and there are thousands that come every day, you know, to minister together and mingle and like worship together from all, you know, ends of the world. Much more recently, Father Sorin and the founders of Notre Dame have built this institution in order to make the world, you know, a better place. And even more recently, you know, Dr. Rafat and Zoreen Ansari have built the Ansari, you know, Institute. And, you know, and I came and joined, and inshallah, God willing, the good God willing, you know, others will come and join. So I thank you, Zoreen and Rafat Ansari, for giving me the opportunity to partake in this good cause. I feel so privileged to be part of a righteous community that is working towards making, you know, changing the conversation and making this, you know, world a better place. So for all that, I feel like I'm connected with Notre Dame. I thank you and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, my friends, we are now approaching the end of the program. To close our evening and to thank the family that has made all of this possible, Drs. Rafat and Zoreen Ansari, please welcome the Dean of the Keough School, Scott Appleby.
I want to reassure some of you, there's a nasty rumor going around, I don't know its origins, that I'm not always parsimonious in speech, and therefore you might think being given the last word might keep us here for a while. I want you to know, just one page. Now, it is back to back, and it is single space, 10-point type, but my topic is gratitude. This is the topic I was assigned. What a lovely and apt assignment to conclude this evening's celebration. Was it Pope Paul VI or Karl Rahner, whose last words were, "All is grace"? It could well have been Dorothy Day, Baba Farid, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Guru Gobind Singh, Roshi Joan Halifax, religious adepts all, and only a twinkling of a star-filled firmament of luminaries found in all sacred traditions, including unsung ordinary women, children, and men, who by their persistence in hope and love proclaim the glory of God. By these countless religious virtuosi, we are enjoined to ceaseless prayer. And that prayer is simple. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a challenge, even a scandal, such a prayer represents to those who, with ample evidence, decry as callow or willfully blind those who voice a yes into the seeming void, who in their bliss appear to scandalously ignore the cry of the countless suffering who appear unredeemed by a grace that counts for anything in this broken world. And this at bottom is the mystery in which the Ansari Institute is called to participate, namely that people of faith are called to affirm, not decry, the broken world, the one who created and sustains it, and most daunting, the religions that presume to embody and institutionalize these affirmations of grace. Religions, as we know all too well, are not always seen as exemplars of grace and forgiveness in the public realm. But at Notre Dame, we are called to respectfully affirm, and the Ansari Institute and its friends and partners here this evening do this first and foremost by engaging religions and people of religion. There's much to unpack in this term engagement, and you'll be relieved to learn that I will leave the unpacking to another time. Suffice it to say now, however, that as a university, we engage first by studying and creating knowledge about and enhancing understanding of religion and religions, by critically reflecting on the claims and behaviors of the religions, but also we engage by interacting with one another within, across, and beyond faith traditions, by taking what my mentor Martin Marty calls the risk of hospitality, the risk of being transformed by the very act of opening ourselves to, even to hosting, the encounter with the religious or the secular other. We haven't said as much tonight about engagement with secular folk, and that's also part of what Ansari will do, engagement across and within religions. But if we're going to fight to end poverty, to address the ravages of climate change and refugees and all the challenges we're all concerned about, the religious faith traditions are not going to do this alone. They have to do this in engagement not only with one another, but with people outside those traditions who might be called secular, an inadequate word. But in any case, we take the risk of hospitality, engaging with the religious or secular other, the risk of being transformed. So it's a moment to speak gratitude, and our gratitude begins with all of you in this room. Many of you in this room are old and dear friends. You are located here at Notre Dame in theology or philosophy or history or Asian studies, in the Kushwa Center or the Center for Social Concerns, and then part of the community at Bethel College, at the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, or the Keough School. All of us are engaged with one another, and now with the Ansari Institute, in this mission to understand and to risk transformative hospitality. So this is what you have set in motion, Rafat and Zoreen, a company of like-minded scholars, educators, and advocates who believe that the sacred traditions offer the world a needed measure of hope and resilience. Tonight we are grateful, most of all, for you.